Hello, class. So I'm gonna start my project. I'm gonna try and do this in one take, so we'll see how that goes. And sorry if the audio quality isn't the best. I'm recording on my phone, so let's just see if we can get through this. All right, let's begin. So my project is over the topic of early dictators and the power they wielded over their people. Throughout all of history, entire populations have been ruled by a single person, and this still continues even in today's world. Um, and to understand the rise to power, we have to look back at the early examples in ancient times, ancient civilizations, and ancient governments. So we turn our eyes to our first topic, which is the ancient Aztec Empire. And the Aztecs created the empire by dissolving of the Triple Alliance, which they had entered in with the two other city-states. Their names are very hard to pronounce, so I'm not going to attempt that. And later, it just became so strong that it had all the power within the alliance, and then later the alliance just fell, and it was the strongest power within the Americas at the time. And the entire empire was under control of just the single emperor, and he would rule absolutely, and people believed it was with the will of the gods he ruled. Then human sacrifices weren't just a thing that were done, they were done in the name of the emperor and also to appease the gods because they believed the gods helped to aid the emperor. And then they believed this led to good crop yields and a long harvest. The population of the Aztec Empire were widely distributed, and few cities were only densely populated, but these cities helped to create a web for central government to help administer the entire empire. And citizens were required to participate in state-run rituals and sacrifices because they had a statewide religion which was polytheistic, having many gods, and it was a bloody religion with sacrifice. And then there were also some things that at times were mandatory, such as sometimes the state would collect crops and would make people participate in sports, which were at times mandatory. And for my primary source for the early Americas, I have selected Hernan Cortez's letter to King Charles V of Spain. And the reason I chose this one is because it shows that the Europeans were amazed when they first arrived to the Americas. And they viewed the Aztec society with great awe, but they also viewed them as inferior because, of course, they would. They're European, and they tried to convert all Amerindians because they viewed their ritualistic religion as backwards. They tried to convert them to Christianity, and he's basically explaining in this that they're not taking a liking to it and just won't understand it. And this is quite a common theme throughout history with Europeans believing they're the saviors, and sort of a social Darwinist concept in the New World. And that brings us on to Islam and the Middle East. So one of the earliest civilizations and one of the most prolific arose in modern-day Iraq. The fertile Middle East permitted large populations, and this led to increase in trade and a growing economy, and this helped to develop cooperation amongst all its citizens. This in turn aided in the spread of religious concepts, which most notably helped spread Islam. And this new faith, Islam, was formed in the 7th century in Mecca, but it quickly spread. Muhammad and his teachings were key in the unification of his fellow Arab brothers and sisters across the Arabian Peninsula. This led to the establishment of the first caliphate. The Muslim states were united under a strong known secular government ran entirely by the caliph. And the two branches of Islam, even to this day, disagree on who should be appointed to the positions. Followers of the Shia faith detail that the caliph should be a descendant of Muhammad, divinely chosen the same way imams are appointed. I don't know if I just butchered that, but imams. While Sunnis believe the caliph should be elected by those in the Muslim community. And throughout the entire history of Islam, 29 official caliphs have existed, with the first caliph being the father-in-law of Muhammad, as his daughter was Aisha, and he was married off to Muhammad the Prophet as one of his many wives. And he started the Rashidun Caliphate, and it saw its capital in Medina. And the man Abu Bakr helped to spread the faith and created a non-secular government which suppressed revolutions and dissidents via military expansionism. And the popularity for him and his government grew immensely through conquest of other peoples, social welfare programs, and relatively free speech. The welfare and aid was sent from the federal or the central government to the thousands of mosques around and inside the caliphate. Then it was distributed by local councils to the local population. And in more modern times, I just feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but some people are ignorant and don't realize that there are radical groups at this time that are trying to form a modern day caliphate, and they're best known as ISIS, although an overwhelmingly amount of Muslims reject their theory, their cause, and disavow the group's radical beliefs. I just thought I should point that out, and I'll later delve deep into this turmoil, but during the ancient times, the Middle East saw landmark advances in things such as cartography, which is map making. One example is Al-Idrisi's world map, which was the most accurate and advanced map of medieval times. And then there are great inventors such as Al-Zirawi's notable contributions in the field of medicine, which are the invention of the syringe, forceps, and the medical needle. And these are just a couple of the small contributions that this region has made to the world. But this society at the time had very egalitarian concepts undiscovered by the rest of the ancient world, and people were viewed as equal, though it was still patriarchal and women still had to fight for their rights. Islamic law kept its adherents content, but it also helped to protect autocrats' power grabs throughout the region as a means of justification. One example of rebellion and justification of Islamic law was when the Bedouin tribes, I think that's how you pronounce it, Bedouin tribes rebelled and sought autonomy from the larger government and caliphate. They were crushed with the military, and for these reasons, the Middle East and Islam both continue to be major global players. And my primary source for the Middle East and Islam is the 24th surah from the Quran, which is basically the 24th verse, and it's called the Tilted the Light, and this shows that men were seen as superior to women, and women were expected to be extremely modest and conservative with the way they dressed, to the way they acted, and basically just the entire way they lived, and were basically subservient to men, not just their husbands. Next, we turn our focus to Africa, which is the world's second largest continent, which is important because it's got a massive area and diverse geography, especially in North Africa, which allows for easy cultivation of crops, which is an important ingredient in any successful civilization. Though several kingdoms and empires took root in Africa, most states were loosely governed and consisted of mainly farmers ran by small village councils. But one example is the Kingdom of Kush, which was a very developed civilization at the time. And under the reign of King Costa, the Kushites conquered Thebes and most parts of Egypt. He later sought to expand the military to unrivaled strength. This was used against foreign rivals as well as domestically within the kingdom. The Kush government significantly increased bilateral trade with the Middle East, and exchanges of ideas increased the number of monarchies and the spread of Islam from the north. The government hoped tie the economies to the state, making it more centralized, and the Empire of Kush sought to gain smaller territories and increase their access to water resources. This was done by the monarchs invading and annexing small tribal communes, further mixing the demographics in the kingdom, which can be a good thing, but in this instance, it led to internal revolutions within the kingdom, but they were responded to harshly with some other governments in Africa, such as Adel and Axum, that would sell their opposition into slavery to the European slave traders. And then this in turn really hurt unity within Africa and eventually led to the weakening of the respective governments. and eventually led them to grow more corrupt and decrease the freedoms of the people. And my primary source for Africa is, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to say this, the Chaojukwa on East Africa, which was the Chinese's take or image they received of Africa. And this basically documents the strict classes and the wealth of the elite, and also the power they had, and also the Chinese and their take on the taboo traditional beliefs of the Africans, which some were outlawed by the African governments but were still practiced anyways. And now we transition into China, which is often regarded as one of the greatest cradles of all civilizations, and started as far back as 1500 BC with the Shang dynasty, which seized power in China. And in the Song dynasty, the ruling class lived extravagantly, while the remaining civilians lived modest to poor lives, and only members of the elite were able to participate within the government. And the Shang dynasty brought new improvements to their military force, such as new weapons, better gunpowder, and better organized militia groups. This has remained an important asset through many of the dynasties since the Shang dynasty. And they also embrace a Chinese writing system which is still in use today. The Shang dynasty collapsed under its own weight and the internal pressures, which splintered the kingdom into several independent regions, leading to fighting between the areas for power until it was reunified with the Qin dynasty after their last enemy was defeated, controlling all of China. And then the decentralized Han dynasty came into war and conflict with the more centralized Qin dynasty. And this struggle between permanent and mobile settlements was continuous, and this would later affect the economy, militaries, and social structure of all of China, and would lead the Song dynasty to be more of a mixed hybrid between decentralized and centralized government. And for my primary source for China, I have a letter to the Pope, which is basically the Christians communicating with the Mongols, and it's the Pope writing to the Mongolian people, asking them to stop attacking fellow Christians, and it even asked the Mongolians to convert to Christianity themselves, but the Mongols refused to convert to Christianity and basically laughed it off because the Pope wouldn't meet him in person and just send an emissary to spread the word. And this takes us to South and Southeast Asia, and this region hosted many historic civilizations that were all connected through the Silk Road. But the Mauryan dynasty was founded by Chandragupta, and this united all of India after the death and fall of Alexander the Great. This was definitely one of the most developed states in all of southern Asia, and it was heavily organized autocratic government, which saw the use of bureaucrats' rule adopted into the Arthashastra, which helped lay out the lives of the common people, mixed with a strict class system, and this gave the wealthy unmatched power. And then other nations in the area and parts of the Mauryan dynasty in India sought to become major trading hubs, and many found success in doing so. One example was Kola, which cemented itself as a trading power, and this gave the dynasty great wealth, though the caste system still kept the poor oppressed and kept the rich wealthy until the Pallavas later came and conquered the area. And now we look at the Ghazni dynasty, which controlled the regions as well as modern-day Afghanistan, and this single group by itself reversed a lot of the stability and progress of the region. Though Islam was spreading through southern Asia, this dynasty was really hurt with their relations with other civilizations with different religious beliefs other than Islam, or same style of governance. One example is Kashmir. And some of the revolutions were with ethnic Chinese territories, but with Indian authorities, and the occupation didn't last too significantly long, but they were later removed. And the source used for Southern Asia is a Muslim ruler suppresses Hindu practices, and this was important because India and areas around it are a majority Hindu, and it details that the Muslim ruler banned many things that Hindus did that were considered haram or forbidden by Islam. These rulers banned such activities to indoctrinate the people into Islam and spread the religion. Some of the things that were banned were drinking, smoking of some plants, and collecting loans, interest on loans. And now we're in the East Asian rimlands, which were quite often subject to Chinese imperialism throughout their entire history. When governments did form, they tended to be militarily authoritarian to combat the Chinese aggression, though Japan was a definite exception because they remained fully independent and never came into threat by China, but they were definitely influenced by China and their culture. And all governments and institutions around the rimlands were directly impacted or influenced by the Chinese governments. And the governments of Vietnam and Korea used populist sentiments and rebellion to loosen China's stranglehold over the region. One example is Japan's Prince Shotoku, and he implored that the Japanese people accept his newfound religion, which he brought from China, which is the religion is Buddhism. At first, it isn't really accepted by the people; they don't really approve of it. But then the government made it the official belief system and enforced its rules and laws. Later, a coup d'état began in 645 AD, and Emperor Kotoku made the Taika reforms, which gave the central government more power, though the government inflated and did not properly govern, which caused the wealthy to hire protection known as the samurai, who would do the master's bidding and followed a strict set of rules and code. This led to them forming a military-esque government known as a shogunate, which stripped the emperor of the emperor's true powers, and later helped splinter Japan into feudalism / small factions. And then they all fought for power over the region. And my primary source is the Chronicles of Japan, which was chosen because it gives us an important glimpse into the law and order of the country while showing off the Chinese-inspired strong governing body with ideals such as hierarchy and lawfulness. And this keeps repeating throughout the entire document, so they really drove home the points of lawfulness. And Europe is our next target, as Europe was a target of famine and diseases, most notably the Black Plague. This new disease was carried on fleas on the backs of rats, and the casualties inflicted were very unprecedented, and they believed that this was a punishment that was divine for their sin-filled lives sent from God. And this helped to empower the church and help strengthen Christianity and its believers. And Europe was reunited by Germanic tribes, and many kingdoms sprung up out of the ashes of Rome once it fell, such as the Visigoths and the Franks. But the true power, what I want to focus on, isn't really a state. It's more of an institution, but it definitely had true power, and this was held by the newly organized Christian church. In dioceses, which were small communities with people of the Christian faith, bishops held complete control over the Christian people in these areas, and then each bishop answered to a archbishop, which was in control of a province, and then he was controlled by the Central Church. And then the church later found great success in converting Germanic pagans and they were indoctrinated within Christianity. And the church later collected offerings and tithes. So many, as the followers increased, so did the amount of wealth and the amount of power that the church had. Monks and nuns were shining examples of the church's propaganda. And I know that's a word people don't want to use a lot, but that's exactly what it was. And it successfully had its followers dedicate their lives to the church. And many followed to be absolved of their sins because they did this in belief of their, to compensate for their sinful lives. They committed their lives to the church. And then the church and Pope led crusades on who they deemed as the Muslim invaders and infidels because they sought to control the Holy Land, that is Jerusalem. Can't speak, not Jerusalem. And Pope Urban II declared, "Those who fight and die ascend to heaven on the battlefield." The First Crusades was a success, but the Muslims vowed to return. This would continue for many bloody wars. And my source I used for the Crusades was A Miracle of St. Bernard, because the document states, "If you do not commit to the church in Jesus Christ, then you will be in a life of sin and evil," which was a reoccurring message from the church. And my next topic is the Byzantine Empire, which was it was Eastern Rome, and it was its successor of the Eastern provinces after the West came into fierce conflict and collapsed. Its capital was in Constantinople and served as an important source and city of Christianity. Later, it was controlled by Emperor Justinian. He sought to completely rebuild the Holy Roman Empire to its former glory, though many state he overexpanded and ended up actually weakening the empire, such as in Italy. He claimed to have taken over Italy, but their presence wasn't strong enough there, and they lost Italy within several years to tribal people. Then the Byzantines had lost the Roman concept of a republic, which instead they gave their emperors a lot of power, and they were only aided by a small advisory council, which couldn't do much. And Justinian increased state control over the people through his civil laws that he passed, because they were under the threat of the Seljuk Turks invading. And then he also increased the military presence dramatically, and Byzantine called for the aid of the Christian church to combat the Islamic tide, as they called it. In response, the call was instead for a crusade by Pope Urban II, and the Crusaders kind of backstabbed the Byzantines by instead of giving the conquered territories to the Byzantines, they made 4 new states of the conquered lands, and then later Byzantine does end up falling to the Turks, and that ends its presence. And then my last source for the Byzantines was the Defense of Liberal Instruction of Women. This showed that after the Dark Ages and the plague and the fall of Byzantium and just everything, that Europe as a whole made many advancements in science and technology, to gender equality, and to even the arts during the Renaissance times, and this continues for several thousand years throughout Europe. That's my project, and yep. Adios.